Are you wondering if your resume is what is holding you back? Well, stick around because in this video, I'm going to share with you 10 things that you can do to fix that problem resume. If you're dealing with an unsuccessful job search, it's well worth your time to try to troubleshoot and pinpoint where things might be going wrong. And here's a little litmus test that it might indeed be the resume. If you're applying for job after job and you're reasonably qualified for the positions that you're applying to, in other words, you meet 70 to 80% of the job's requirements, yet you keep on getting rejected, it's almost always a resume issue. And as a career coach and a resume expert, I've seen tens of thousands of resumes, and I'm going to share with you the most common things that I see people doing wrong, and more importantly, how to fix them. But before we get into that, if you're interested in learning how to reclaim control, act like the CEO of your career, make sure you sign up for my free weekly newsletter. And in it, I share concise, actionable tips on how to approach your career with more strategy, how to position yourself in interviews, and how to write those pesky resumes. So if you're interested in learning how to upgrade your career, make sure you sign up for that free weekly newsletter. So for most of us who are actively applying for jobs, your resume is going to be the first impression that you often make. And this is especially true if you're applying to jobs as opposed to a recruiter coming and seeking you out instead. Keeping in mind the conditions of the labor market, you may be faced with some stiff competition. It's not uncommon for companies to get over 100 applications per role. So it's really important to make sure that your resume stands out. So the first thing you should do is make it easy for the recruiter to find who you are and how to get a hold of you. And you would be surprised, because you think this might sound very obvious, that I've actually had issues trying to find certain candidates' contact information. I've actually seen resumes that didn't list a phone number or contact information, and it made me have to try to dig for it. And if I've got a lot of resumes to sift through, you can rest assured I'm probably not going to spend the time to try to decipher how to get a hold of you. Maybe go get the yellow book and try to look you up. Make it as easy as possible. I recommend put your contact information in a very legible format at the very top of your resume. Don't put your contact information at the bottom in a footer. Just make it simple and easy. While you're at it, make sure you have a professional email address. You may want to drop the AOL online and save that for your junk email. You also might want to consider adding a hyperlink to any online portfolios, maybe a resume site, or even your LinkedIn profile, because it's an additional branding point and a hiring manager may actually be interested in checking that out, and you can really bring your application home if you have that set up properly. Next thing to be mindful for is spelling and grammar errors. Now, I'm not the best speller and I certainly don't have the best grammar in the world, so this is not something that I'm necessarily a stickler for. However, there are lots of recruiters, probably more importantly, there's a lot of hiring managers out there that will judge you based on it. And their thought process is, well, if you don't have attention to detail for grammar or for structure or spelling, then you're probably not going to have good attention to detail in our job. So it's like they use it as an indicator. Right, wrong, or indifferent, let's try not to give them any reason to reject us on something so stupid and arbitrary like spelling. A super helpful tip that I have used, and I use it religiously, is I have a plugin for Grammarly. And if you're not familiar with what Grammarly is, it's basically a plugin that you can use on your desktop. I think it actually works on mobile as well, but it'll automatically search for spell. It's like basically like spell check on steroids. It'll find spelling errors, but more importantly, it will help you rephrase and restructure your sentences to make them more legible. And that's super helpful when you're writing a resume. You want it to be as legible and as clean and clear as possible. Grammarly really helps with that. I use it personally. I've been using it for years. I highly recommend it. I'll leave a link down in the description, but it's a super helpful tool and one that I use religiously, and it'll keep you out of trouble if you have poor spelling like I do. But at the very least, before you export, run a spell check or have somebody else read your resume and proof it for you. The next major issue that I see on resumes that end up typically in the no pile is a readability issue, and it's really kind of more of I click on and open up the resume, and if I just see a huge block of text, there's no white space, it's kind of overwhelming. Normally recruiters scan through resumes really quickly looking for very specific things, and if you have this huge dense block of text with no, it's like almost like you can't get a breath in when you're reading it, it's like it's intense, then it's usually a sign that the readability is an issue, because a recruiter may get overwhelmed very quickly and likely won't spend the time necessary to go through and try to parse out things in your resume. So I encourage you, take a look at your resume from a distance, or even let your eyes go out of focus. Do you see any white space? Does the page look dense? Are there clean margins? Are the margins big enough? Are there spaces in between your sentences? Are there spaces in between your sections? And those are all things that contribute to the readability of your resume. And because as job seekers, we are trying to convince an employer to purchase our services, in other words, they're the buyer, we should try to do everything in our power to make our purchasing as easy as possible. And in the spirit of readability, the same thing goes for bullet points. Oftentimes, bullet points get people into trouble, and that usually contributes to the readability factor. I'll see bullet points that are 4 and 5 lines long, full of very dense information that is just too much for a recruiter to try to pull out. Oftentimes, it's very proprietary, and it doesn't make clear sense. We should always try to make our bullet points as concise as possible while still conveying the same message. So as you're going through your resume for readability, pay close attention to your bullet points because those are often an offender for readability. The next major thing is conveying your fit. And this is probably an area where a lot of people get frustrated because they'll put all of this information into their resume and they'll think, well, if I include everything that I've done, it's going to show that I can do this and I can do that and I can do this. And essentially what you're showing is that you're a jack of all trades, but potentially a master of none. And oftentimes recruiters, hiring managers more specifically, are looking for the master of a particular trade and not somebody that's the jack of all trades. So try to be as concise as you can, but also clearly convey your fit so that employers know exactly who you are without having to make them read into your resume and try to pull it out. And a lot of people get frustrated and say things like, well, you're the recruiter, you should be going through and adequately screening my resume. But you have to keep in mind the dynamic here. As a job seeker, we are the seller of our service, so we have to make our package as tidy and as attractive as possible. It's classic marketing 101. So don't send over a really dense resume that has everything that you've ever accomplished in your entire 30-year career and expect a recruiter to read into it to pull that one specific thing out that's on page 7 and paragraph 3 and loaded in a bunch of dense wording and verbiage. Next thing to be mindful of is outdated dates. Be very careful of the dates that you put on your resume because it could be used against you. And this is particularly true with ageism. At a certain point in your career, there's a diminishing return for the amount of experience that's on your resume. And I don't think I've ever recruited for a role that required more than 15 years of total experience. So keep that in mind as you're writing your resume. The stuff that you did in the 1980s and the 1990s probably isn't all that relevant anymore. So you might want to consider omitting that entirely from your resume. Same thing goes for dates of education. If you got that degree in the 1980s, you don't want an employer to use that against you and start to guess your age. So therefore, I recommend that you go back roughly only 10 years in your career. Now, this isn't a hard enough fast. It might be 12 years, might be 8 years, but use your judgment here. The point is that we don't need to put all this information on our resume that's no longer directly relevant to the job that we're trying to apply to. And if you have a lot of experience that precedes that, you may want to just add another section that says other experience, listing it out but omitting those dates. The next thing to avoid is columns, and I see this consistently in resumes. In fact, this might be the single most common error that people make when they submit resumes to me for review. Then the reason being is that the columns in and of themselves aren't necessarily an issue for a recruiter scanning through them, but where it is an issue is with ATS systems or applicant tracking systems, because they don't typically read columns very well. ATS systems traditionally read left to right, so once they get to the end of your first column, they'll just go down to the next line and start to parse your resume that way. Essentially, what that means is that the other rows in your resume are completely invisible. And if you want to be discovered by those large companies that have these massive databases of candidates, you want to make sure that you're as discoverable as possible. Alternatively, if a recruiter is searching through a database of a couple thousand active applicants, they may be looking for a very specific keyword, and you may not show up because the ATS system didn't parse your resume correctly. So avoid those columns if you want to have maximum discoverability. Next up, we have certifications. I often will see certifications that have no direct relevance to the job that they're applying to, or ones that are very out of date. The rule of thumb here is to include certifications that are directly related to the job at hand and are current. If the certification that you achieve lapsed in 1996, I probably wouldn't include it in your resume, because what that shows to me is that the certification is obsolete. And if it were relevant, you probably would have maintained it over the years. So something that you took 20 years ago, unfortunately, probably can't keep putting on your resume with a high degree of effect. And next up, we have templates. I've yet to find a paid resume template site that I would trust my own resume with. The reason being is that most of these resume templates are designed by a graphic designer. No offense to my graphic designer friends, you can absolutely create a much more beautiful resume template than I ever could. However, It's not usually recruiter approved, and it's not usually ATS compliant. And those are the two major issues that I find over and over again. And I can always tell when somebody uses a resume template because I usually have to redo the entire resume from scratch. Because listen, at the end of the day, I would rather have a boring resume that gets results than a stunning resume that ends up getting me rejection letters. And just as a quick aside here, I did actually create a recruiter and ATS approved resume template that I include in my Resume Rocketfuel and Resume Rocketfuel Essentials courses. So those ones will absolutely be fine. Or alternatively, you can just use a base level template that you might find in Microsoft Word. So again, keep in mind that if you want the maximum responses on your resume, it's all about readability and letting a recruiter find what it is that they're looking for very quickly and concisely. And if you're not getting enough responses, it might be the resume that you should take a closer look at. So hopefully you found this video to be helpful as you diagnose your own resume. If you find that you need more help, that's actually something that I specialize in. I actually created 2 courses on resumes. The first one is Resume Rocketfuel, and it is designed to teach you exactly how to write your own resume from a recruiter's perspective, so that it's concise and easy to digest, so those recruiters will hopefully give you a call back, get you into the interview process. And more importantly, it teaches resume strategy. In other words, the why behind what it is that you're doing, because just writing a resume is usually not going to be good enough, but the resume strategy will teach you how to customize and ultimately how to get the most responses back for your resume. However, I also created a scaled down version of that, and it's just the resume writing component, and that's Resume Rocketfuel Essentials. So if you're more budget conscious, that might be a better course for you to start with. Anyway, check those out if you need a little bit more help in your resume journey. I'll leave the link in the course description as well. Anyway, happy job hunting. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.